Should fighting return to the NBA? One coach thinks the answer is yes. Let the gloves come off and let the players fight. I'm Trevor Lane. This is the Basketball Bulletin. Make sure you subscribe right here to the channel. Joined by Donnie Freeman. Donnie, fighting has largely been discouraged in the NBA. Celtics coach Joe Mazulla says, no, we need to go the other direction. Why can't we let these guys fight? I was not expecting to get this kind of comment floating around today.
Yeah, I guess that Joe fancies himself a little tussle, and he wants to see some guys throwing some fists around. But I just got to know what the context of this is. Like, did they ask him, like, should fighting return? Like, does he just throw this out there? It sounds like he does. But regardless, though, definitely not something you would ever expect to hear a coach say in the NBA, given how the NBA has tried very hard to disassociate from that. So definitely pretty interesting.
He has some interesting quotes over the period of time here. He's said some pretty out there things at times. But so I wouldn't put it past him just to kind of launch into this on his own. But here's what he said: the biggest thing that we rob people of from an entertainment is you can't fight anymore. He wants to be able to fight because it's entertaining. I wish you could bring back fighting. I just don't get why some sports are allowed to clear the benches. We just have a ball. The other sport has one of the hardest surfaces and playing instrument in pucks and sticks, and we're not allowed to throw down a little bit. So obviously he's talking about hockey. He's saying there's fighting in hockey. Why shouldn't there be fighting in basketball? And again, referencing that it would be entertaining if there was fighting in basketball. Okay, before we get into all of the malice at the palace stuff and all that, Rudy Tomjanovich and everything else, if they allowed, let's say the NBA says, Joe Mazulla, by God, you're right. You are right. We're going to allow fighting in the NBA. How would things change?
I don't even know where to begin with that one. That's kind of crazy. Are people just going to just try to fight for no reason? Like, oh, you fouled me just a little bit harder than I would have liked. Oh, let's start fighting. Like, is that where it's going to go? Or would it just be those extreme situations where, every blue moon, somebody gets in somebody else's face, but they're actually allowed to do it? So if that's the case, then I think that things would get kind of interesting. I think it could be quote unquote entertaining as long as it doesn't go too far. But I think that the problem is with that is that you kind of start to disassociate from what the sport is supposed to be. Mm-hmm. It's not really a roughhouse type of sport. There's contact, there's physicality, of course, but that's not really what this is, right? So I think that if it goes too far, you start to disassociate from it. It's like, okay, am I watching boxing here? Like, what are we trying to do? But I've got to be honest. Some of the times when they do the whole like, hold me back, they're in each other's face and stuff. That stuff does get kind of funny sometimes. I'm looking at it.
When guys get when they're so fired up, but all they're going to do is push a little bit. They're not actually, and that's the NBA rules working, right? That's the NBA's rules working. That's why they're not just throwing punches. But yeah, you guys acting tough when they're not going to do anything. And again, the NBA doesn't want them to. Again, Rudy Tomjanovich, his career almost ended. His face was broken by Kermit Washington back in the day. That was, potentially life-threatening, what happened with him. You think about the malice at the palace. Imagine if Joe Mazulla said this in 2002, 2003, when the malice at the palace was fresh. Oh, he'd be in big trouble for saying this, right? For saying this during that time. The fact that we're, 20 plus years removed from the malice at the palace, that's why this doesn't create quite the same outrage. But I think that we would see rosters change because teams would have to employ essentially goons. You would need guys, because you can't have somebody squaring up with Steph Curry and Steph throws a punch and breaks his hand. You can't have that happen. So you would need guys that their role would be to fight. I think the way you build a roster might even, if fighting was fully allowed, like it is in hockey, the way that they handle it in hockey anyway, you would have to have some guys on the team that would be like protectors for your star level players, because otherwise a strategy would definitely be, hey, end of the bench guy, go pick a fight with Steph, go pick a fight with this guy, with that guy, whatever. And then there you go. That would have to be a change. You would have guys who would have roster spots who maybe weren't necessarily great at basketball, but were great at fighting.
Yeah, that is definitely a thing. So I am a 90s baby, early 90s. So I got to
Uh-huh.
ask you, because I know there are going to be some old heads in the chat or the comments saying, oh, it's just going to be like 80s or whatever basketball. What do you think
Uh-huh.
about that? How close do you think that would be?
Are you asking me because I'm an old head?
Yes.
Is that? Oh my god,
So
that's it.
but you know what? I feel like
I ain't gonna lie, I'm getting cooked.
I'm getting old too, man, because no one else was born in the 90s. I saw a post today where they were like, oh, none of us were alive the last time LeBron didn't score 10 points in a game. And that was 2007. I was like, what are you talking about?
On today's episode of Let's Make Trevor Feel Ancient, hey, what would sit around, children? Let me tell you a tale of life during a magical time known as the 80s. Yes. So, I mean, we have the infamous Kurt Rambis clothesline situation with the Celtics and all of that. Kevin McHale. It was a more rough and tumble, more physical league at that point. If you go back and watch games, then though, like defenses are much better now. I think the athleticism has improved even now, and there were incredibly athletic players then too. But it was a more physical game, and some of that stuff was more allowed. Things didn't necessarily devolve into fight clubs or anything like that, or but you did have, I mean, and we had this all the way up until what, mid 2000s, where teams were
2000s,
employing
yeah.
players that were just a big body, not even necessarily good at basketball, but just a big guy to throw at Shaq because you just needed large
fouls.
human beings. Yeah, exactly. And you'd have guys try to get physical that way. You know, was it more physical that back then? Yeah, it was more contact allowed. Definitely fighting was more of a thing. But it sounds like what Joe Mazulla is talking about is like, no, like legit, like we're going to really let guys do this and not penalize it nearly as much. He's talking about a hockey style model and doing it for entertainment purposes. Like it would be entertaining, but you'd have a lot more injuries. You'd have a lot more issues. And there's reasons why the NBA has tried to clean up that stuff. There's reasons why the flagrant foul rules exist the way that they do now. So I don't think necessarily Mazzulla is talking about taking things back to the 80s and just allowing more physicality and letting you have some fights here and there. He's talking about like legit, there's roles on the team where your job is to fight. And by the way, let's say they did this. Let's say they do this tomorrow. What teams gain an advantage? And I'm really curious, what do people think? Who would gain an advantage if fighting is allowed in the NBA? Let me know in the comments section. But Donnie, what teams benefit if suddenly fighting gets allowed, say tomorrow?
You know, I kind of want to say there are some guys around the league that I kind of want to see if they can kind of back up all the talk. I'm looking at like guys like Draymond. I kind of want to see if he would actually be in someone else's face if all that talking was allowed, or if all that talking turned into fighting. But you know what I'll say is I think any team with Aquaman stands a good chance. So currently, while I don't like Brooks personally, but the Rockets with Aquaman, I think I'll take my chances there.
And of course, Donnie is talking about Steven Adams, who everybody says looks like Jason Momoa. Steven Adams, that is a good call. He is. It wasn't last year because he was hurt, so maybe it was a couple years ago. There was a little skirmish on the floor, and Steven Adams just walked over and picked up the opposing team's player and walked away with him. Like it was a big dude too. And I don't remember who it was that he picked up, but it was like a center. He just walked over and calmly picked the guy up and walked away. I mean,
there was a clip last night from, I think they played the Spurs, and him and Keldon Johnson got into it a little bit while Keldon was on the floor trying to rip the ball away. So it was one of those situations, and he just kind of grabs the ball and picks Keldon up almost like he's a baby. You're picking him off the floor. so like,
I didn't see that.
Yeah, I literally saw it this morning. I started dying. So I'm taking it with me, man.
No. Okay, that's so the Rockets gain an advantage. Who knows what happens with Draymond and the Warriors, because that would be something interesting to watch. We know he's already punched a dude on his team.
Yeah,
so
actually.
He can throw punches. We know that. But here's the real winner of this. And you wouldn't think of it off the jump. The Indiana Pacers. The Indiana Pacers, because they employ James Johnson. No, he doesn't play much, but the 36-year-old is a legit black belt. Like he does MMA, he does kickboxing. I believe he's unbeaten in kickboxing. Like he's a legit fighter. He's talked about how he thinks he could beat John Jones before. So I would have to imagine the Pacers would be the team, ironically, given the malice at the Palace and all that. But I would have to imagine that the Pacers would wind up being the team that would benefit the most because, given James Johnson's credentials, even if he is the last guy at the end of their bench, nobody's going to want to mess with him.
Yeah, if he's got all that going on, then he's the type of one where it's like you walk up to him and you think that he's not all that, but then you get your butt laid out because he was all that. So yeah, that's interesting. I wonder if there's any other players in the league that are like him, where they've done all these other training methods and are good at these other things. So I wonder if that's the case. Somebody we're not thinking of.
We've seen players that have incorporated boxing and things like that. Like I want to say Damian Lillard has done boxing. I could be wrong on that, but it would be an interesting wrinkle. Look, the NBA, despite what Joe Mazulla is saying, they're never going to do it. They're never going to go for it. Not after they've spent all of this time working to make a squeakier clean image after the malice at the Palace over 20 years ago. They've got all these flagrant foul rules, everything in place. If you leave the bench now, you can get suspended, like all kinds of very stiff penalties in place because the NBA does not want this. So kind of funny. And I wonder if we hear from the league on this. I wonder if the Celtics get a phone call. I bet they do, from the league saying, hey, you can't have your coach saying, I want fighting in the NBA. I think the NBA is probably going to give him a little talking to here. But nonetheless, interesting that you've got Joe Mazulla, the coach of right now the number one team in the NBA, in the Boston Celtics, the reigning champs, and he's saying, what should we do for the sport? Let's bring fighting back. Let's do that. Let's create a system where NBA players can brawl. Everybody, let me know in the comment section who would benefit from this kind of a situation. Again, let us know in the comment section. Don't forget to subscribe right here to the Basketball Bulletin and go check out our latest video all about the shady stuff going down in Philadelphia with Joel Embiid and Paul George.